program today. I'm Robert Pignataro, and with me is Karen Spottiswood, and we're really here to discuss the new OSHA record-keeping requirements for submitting illness and injuries. It became effective at the beginning of this year. There's a multi-year implementation schedule, and that's what we're here to discuss, because there's a lot of questions and confusion. During this program, if any of you have questions, this is a script of the dialog box of how you would do that. You just go to where it says chat, type them in. We will field those. We're going to try to answer the questions towards the latter part of the presentation, so we can just make sure, which is our key goal, to get through everything. If there are questions that we don't get to, or questions that you folks think of after, just send them to us, and what we generally do is we put out a question and answer sheet, and we send that to all attendees. So that's it. So with that, we'd like to begin. And what we're really going to look at is why OSHA did this new rule, who's covered, which has created a lot of confusion, as well as the deadlines, what electronic submission is all about, how to prepare for that, and really how this new rule affects injury reporting, discipline, policies, and retaliation, which has a pretty big part in this new rule, and things like safety incentive programs, post-accident drug tests, etc. And as always, there's the specter of increased fines and penalties. So moving on, the stated rationale by OSHA is they want to better understand, get their arms around what illness and injury trends there are. And their feeling is that this will enable them to be more efficient, to engage its compliance and enforcement activities, which is really read as inspect more facilities, which in light of the new penalty structure, which we'll get toward the end of this program, can really create some sizable problems for companies. But basically, they're saying this electronic reporting will improve their ability to target and remove safety and health hazards in businesses, and ensure that workers will not fear retaliation from reporting of an injury. So let's talk about now who's covered. And one of the first things is the new rule does not change an employer's existing obligations. So if you're a company that had to post this at a minimum between April 1st, Feb 1st and April 30th, you still have to do that, and in most cases you would still probably be covered by these regulations. It does require some employers, and that's their words, to electronically submit some records. But I think, as you'll all see pretty quickly, when you look at who has to now report electronically, the list of those that have to report is grown substantially. So electronic reporting requirements are really based on the size of the establishment, not the firm. Okay, and we're kind of always amazed at the words that sometimes the regulatory authorities use. Okay, what they really, in our opinion, should be saying is the size of the facility. Okay, a firm, a company could have multiple facilities. The recording criteria that we're going to see in a few minutes is really dealing with how many employees there are at that facility or separate location, not how many there are at all the locations when added together. Okay, so an establishment equals a single physical location where business is conducted or services are performed. And so that's a facility, establishment/facility. And as we said, you can have multiple ones. All right, there's really kind of three categories of employers. Large employers. Now, OSHA defines a large employer as anyone at any facility or /establishment with 250 or more employees. The next category, and this has caused enormous confusion, and most of you are probably in this category, of high-risk employers, facilities with 20 to 249 employees. And then there's a third category, or other facilities, establishments, that OSHA notifies for whatever reason we want you to report. Now, just before we get into a little bit more about this, companies with 11 to 19 employees, many of whom were posting these, would still keep posting those, but not have to electronically report. This is about having to electronically report, because as this gets implemented, the sending of papers is going to be eliminated. Okay, and of course, companies with fewer than 10 are not required unless you're specifically requested from OSHA. So let's now look at just some of the deadlines. And we have the year, the establishment, and then when you have to report it. But let's just look mostly, because most of you are in that category by the third column, there are establishments with 20 to 249. By July 1st of this year, you would post your 300A, you would file your 300A, for the calendar year 2016. And then in next year, you would do that for 2017. And then you'll see that those are 2 July dates. And then by the third year of this, you're really doing the same electronic reporting, but now you're doing it by March 1st of every year. And it continues on for that, for the duration of the program. Now, who's covered? If you're a large employer, if you've got 250 more employees at any facility, you're covered. The next category are establishments that are who's covered. Okay, if you have 250, these are your deadlines. And you could see that there's a difference as we go through this. Those with 250 employees, which are considered sizable establishments or facilities by OSHA, are this year doing the 300A, but then you'll see in the following years they have to do the 3 different reports that roll up into your 300A. So there's a lot more, again, electronic reporting that the larger companies have to do. Okay, this is an example of a summary, and I know Karen Spottis, who deals really with most of our customers and issues and concerns they have, and may have well dealt with some of you already on this phone about the nuance of this, can kind of explain some of the peculiarities or some of the basic features of these forms.
So there's basically 3 forms. The 300A, which is the annual summary. The information on the left-hand side is basically pulled from your 300 log, and the information on the right-hand side is specific company information, including the number of employees, the number of hours worked, and this is also the place where company executive has to sign off on it, certifying that the information is correct. I mentioned the 300 log. This is where you would actually enter in information about all your recordable injuries, assigning a case number to each one, and tracking it and updating it as necessary as the person's follow-up progresses. And then the last form is the Form 301, which is the individual incident report, and this actually also ties into the 300 log in regards to the case number. So the case number needs to match on both the 300 log and the 301 form, but this is detailed information about the incident, be it an injury or an illness.
Okay, great. So now we're going to what we feel is kind of the sweet spot for many in this audience, which is an employer establishment with 20 to 249. Again, many times in the rules and the regulations, there's words, and the words are defined. And often we really have to look at that because it's not how we think of something. Like when we think of high-risk employer or high-risk industry, many out there may not think that their industry is a high-risk one. These are just some of the ones that are covered. as high risk. We've included in the next slide and in your handouts a comprehensive list, the list actually that OSHA provides with that. And this is the list in this presentation. Also, in all of the things that you received, all the materials you received, this is reprinted. But as you quickly look down that, in some cases, there's a number of industries that some of you might be in or have facilities that are in that meet the criteria, but you wouldn't ordinarily consider them, high risk operations. But if you're on the list and you have 220 to 249, you are covered. Another thing there, at the top of that, you saw the words NAICS. And a lot of us are aware of SIC. Both of these refer to a way of putting a numerical number on an industry group. This slide shows you where you can go to get the list that takes you from SIC to NAICS, just to verify that your company is right. In this little example, it shows that a fabricated structural metal company is listed. They have an SIC of 3441, but their matching NAICS code is 332312. So basically, you're using the first two digits at the left, and if you go back to that chart that we just showed, I think it's probably, well, it's marked there, that's great. In manufacturing, they're saying anyone with the first two digits of 31 to 33, you're covered. So that's really what you have to look to if you really want to verify it. And we really advise everybody to do that, just to make sure that your operation, if it is covered, you're doing what you need to be doing. Okay, so moving on now. This recaps it. This slide can be used to who has to electronically report. Okay, it shows you what to do and the deadline to submit the form. And really, everyone in this group should really follow that form if you are, of course, any one of those covered industries on the sheet. Now, on top of that, if you're not on any of these, but you are notified by OSHA that they want you to electronically report, for whatever reasons, you have to electronically report. That's what they mean by upon notification. And those entities, you'll see, typically when you get that, a notification reporting requirement, they'll tell you what they're going to report. These are the deadlines that we expect them to follow. Now, none of this changes electronic submission of severe injury reporting, which took effect way back in January 15. And these are for many of these listed below, which if you have a fatality, you would have to report that within 8 hours. Inpatient hospitalizations within 24 hours. Amputations, loss of an eye, 24 hours. Now, one thing on amputations, and we're going to address some of this in reporting and not reporting. We've dealt with a number of entities that have not, in all cases, reported what the regulatory authority feels is an amputation, which many times includes the tip of a finger. Even if it's a small tip of a finger and it doesn't even involve much below the surface of the nail, that in many cases is considered, or almost always is considered, an amputation. Therefore, it's reportable. Severe injury reporting requirements are on this next slide, and that's you call the local office during normal hours, or you go to the hotline. And you can file online through that link given right there. And you should have at a minimum the following: the name of the company, the name of the employee or employees affected, the location and time of the incident, a brief description, and someone at your facility who would be your key contact person and phone number. And in many, many cases, this information is dealt with and there's a follow-up inspection. And one thing is, too, with that follow-up inspection, a lot of times OSHA is not just there looking and talking to you about the illness or injury. They could be examining your entire workplace. So it could be something that you have a problem, somebody was hospitalized or somebody cut off the tip of their finger, and they come in, the next thing is a full-blown OSHA inspection, and that can spell a lot of trouble and problems if you don't have the other areas of your business in OSHA compliance. A couple things, almost everyone I think in this program is in the states that are under the federal rule. Maryland would be an example of a state that's a state plan state. And for those of you that have facilities or locations in those states, be aware that they have 6 months for the state plan state to adopt all the provisions. They can add more stringent ones if they so decide, but they must have at a minimum at least the equivalent to what we're going over here today. And probably most of the state plan states will, from what we're hearing, have these reporting requirements in effect to at least match what the federal ones are. So that's really going to be by July of this year. All right, now we'd like to get into just some of the basics for kind of how to prepare for these new requirements. There's going to be a series of steps that you should follow. The first one is that conduct an assessment of how you currently report, what your reporting protocols are, and does it comply with the new rule. The part of that is look at your handbooks, policies, written programs you might have to see if they have clear, reasonable, and consistent reporting requirements. Consistent is probably a word that we can't use too strongly here, because that if something is there and it's consistent and it's administered uniformly, that really avoids you from falling into your disciplining or you're retaliating against an employee or someone for reporting an illness or injury, which has a lot of teeth in this new rule. OSHA is very specifically in this new rule looking at are companies putting in place policies, procedures, or actions that dissuade people from not reporting something or handling that another way. And so they really have taken a lot of pains to very clearly state that they're looking at a number of ways. If that happens, they're going to nail the employer. Okay, so look for any things that might be construed to deter. Again, if you do something and you do it for all under similar circumstances, and then that should be in a policy, in a handbook, in a memo, and be consistently employed. And of course, that would also include employee accountability or discipline. It's not that you can't discipline an employee, it's not that you can't follow procedure, but it needs to be consistent for all. And again, those words down there, document, document, document. If you do something, you say, well, that's our policy, but it's not in writing. In many cases, that could be really argued against, or it's almost as if you didn't have it. So, if you're not already maintaining your OSHA records, which some are in this group or in many groups, you're really, specifically the form 300, 300A, and 301, you really need to do that as soon as possible. Now, a little bit, as soon in this presentation, we're going to get to some of these forms. We really advise, and we can connect you with them. I think everybody got them in their handouts or got a link to get them. And OSHA has done these, and right now, the forms are data-wise connected, so it allows the transmission of data from one form to another, which is going to make your electronic submission, or should make it a lot easier when OSHA comes out with the summary of what the electronic filing is going to require. So again, these forms are linked, they're from OSHA, and they're really not too tough to get used to and to use. And we really, some companies have their own version of recording these. That would be okay, but we really urge you to take a look at these OSHA forms because, you know, I mean, just the logic of it is for electronic reporting, since OSHA created these links, if they just created one step further, it should be something that helps in all the reporting. Okay, so the record-keeping forms we've seen, and right now we're waiting for what the electronic filing is gonna be. The next step in how to prepare, which is step 3 now, is when an injury occurs, use the decision tree that OSHA's put out to determine whether they're recordable. This is in your materials, but also now I'd like to have Karen kind of run through some of this, because we found that a lot of times companies are over-reporting certain situations that they really don't have to. So,
thanks, Robert. So, looking at the decision tree, starting at the top. So, first of all, did the employee have an injury or illness? If it was just a near miss, it is not an OSHA reportable. So, if someone was injured or got sick, the next thing you would look at is whether or not it was work-related. So, did it happen on the job? If it's a no, don't record it. If it's a yes, then you look at the next criteria, which is whether or not it's a new case. If it is not a new case, or that it's an existing case, you would have to actually go back and update a previous year's 300 log and equivalent forms to update on whatever the progress is on that particular injury or illness. And then the last one is related to the general recording criteria, or if it's some specific cases, and that's pretty much the medical treatment beyond first aid. So if it is medical treatment beyond first aid, it's a recordable injury. If it's not, you just put a Band-Aid on it, it's not to be listed on your OSHA 300 log.
Now, one thing is, and often, Karen, I know this medical treatment beyond first aid sometimes throws people, in that they put a Band-Aid on it. There's a cut. They put a Band-Aid on it. And I know that is then not a reportable.
Correct.
If, however, somebody is sent off-site to have stitches, to have something else done, that's an example of where that would now be. Saying cut, okay, we looked at it, and then we sent them someplace. That becomes a recordable.
Yes. Yes.
Reportable, right? Okay. Great. All right, now the next step is 4, and that's to generate your 300A as you normally would, and then submit the first report electronically to OSHA. Now, one thing we really want to stress in this is this new standard, while it has other provisions about discipline and retaliation, is really about electronically reporting. It's very clear that OSHA is saying that as this kicks in July, etc., there is no paper reporting. Okay, some of you have to still do posting, and those requirements will still be in place, but this is about electronic reporting, and the only way you're going to be able to report to be compliant is electronically. And again, this we will get more guidance on this in February, and we may even have a follow-up program, because usually what happens is when these systems come on board, there's a whole lot of questions and issues with them. So now this next slide is some of what we know. Is they're saying they're going to provide a secure website, and that's, of course, their statement about secure, which we have to rely on, that what they're saying is secure, even though many of the government websites have been breached and data issues, etc., in the past. But, of course, that's a cybersecurity issue, which we really should talk about in some ways, because there's a lot of confidential information in some of these, in ways that a cyber issue can happen through reporting or going back and forth with any website that could compromise your internal servers and systems. But we'll deal with that a little bit later in another format. For right now, what they're saying is they're going to provide a secure website, and you'll be able to manually enter data into a form, a pre-existing form, or you'll be able to upload a file to process single or multiple establishments at the same time, or you'll be able to transmit data electronically for users of automated record-keeping systems. And what we really have to see is what does each one of those entail. And as I said, there's a lot of questions that we have, and I'm sure a lot of questions and issues that many of you in the regulated community will have. Again, this is supposed to go live in February, and we don't know exactly when in February, other than this not being a leap year. We hope it's not the 29th as the target date, right? So, okay, now one of the last things they're preparing is training your staff. And here's a couple of things they do that we have gleaned from this is, one, you train all employees on reporting procedures. And really, all supervisors need to be given clear guidance and information and training on how to respond to an accident and incident investigations, what to do about that, because that can, if not followed properly, subject the company to being challenged on reporting or being cited for discrimination. And of course, one person should be designated as the quote-unquote record keeper. So here's another hat for somebody to be given, I guess, to really how to use this, how to do it, etc. Let's just talk a little bit more about training now. The words in the regs say inform employees of their right to work-related injuries reporting free from retaliation. The key operating words there, just like before, consistent application, inform. Now, inform really suggests some type of training or awareness. Again, this doesn't have to be necessarily a full-blown training program, but you know, just putting something up on a bulletin board without letting everybody know what it is, where it is, and why it is not really constituting informing, okay? So you really have to take a couple of steps here. Some of the training should be, especially to both supervisors and, in turn, employees, how do you report an accident, an incident? Who do you report that to? The supervisors should also be very well acquainted with the company policies and procedures that make the company compliant with this new rule onto, you know, how is that reported? Who is it reported to? What information is that employee given? You know, such things as injury management, a return to work program, information needed for completing these reforms, information needed if it's considered one of those other criteria where there's a hospitalization, a death, etc., assisting and information with post-accident investigation and any possible disciplinary action. I mean, it's not saying that employees can't be disciplined, but there are procedures that you really need to follow because if it isn't a proper procedure or a consistent one, it can get the company into a lot of problems. Among the other issues are, what kind of response is there as far as follow-up? How do we look at what happened? Post-accident investigation. Is there some way to monitor corrective actions? Or, again, here's disciplinary. And this is really for the supervisors. They're going to be the key folks there to make sure that the employee and that accident or illness and stuff is reported up the way it should be, that the employee is dealt with properly, and that things are being followed so that a employee, and it could even be the current or former disgruntled employee, doesn't make a case that, oh, I had an illness or an injury, or I think I had one, I reported it, and that's when they were all over me. That's when they started treating me differently. And these are the kind of things that we've all seen and are likely to see. So to avoid that retaliation claim or false claim, you really have to make sure that everything that's being done is being done consistently. Okay, another person needing training is the record keeper. We see very often that things are being recorded and they're being recorded incorrectly. Over-reporting can be very bad because it subjects the company, especially now with electronic managing of all this data, that this company may stick out in its industry group in a certain state or location as someone that's got a workplace that's much more unsafe than another company. And that would, in many cases, trigger an OSHA inspection of the entire company. So, again, whoever's handling the data, it's not something that somebody should just be given, a quick handoff, and here you don't look like you have too many other things to do this. That individual should really be trained, and the company should really invest the time in that individual to make sure they know how to report these things accurately, correctly, and where to go if they need some help in doing that. And again, that individual would help to ensure, you may want to have a checklist that things have been followed to verify that this has been a consistent implementation and you're avoiding the anti-retaliation provisions. And you want to track the incidents and accidents and trends. And there's a difference. Some companies track incidents, accidents, trends, even near misses. Okay, that's good, and that can be very beneficial. The thing is, you don't want to confuse that in any way, shape, or form with something that then gets reported on a form to OSHA, because that can really change your whole profile. Okay, so the record-keeping requirements and some common mistakes. Now I'd like to turn it back to Karen because a lot of these she's seen and worked through with a lot of companies.
Thank you, Robert. So the basic record-keeping requirements include recording the injury or illness within 7 days on your OSHA 300 log. This would be cases that are work-related, a new case, and meets one or more of the general or special recording criteria, and that's in 29 CFR 1904. We have most of them listed here. So what makes it a reportable criteria? Well, a fatality, days away from work, which was formerly called the lost work days, the number of lost work days. If the person was transferred to another job or they have restricted work responsibilities, that is considered a reportable case. Medical treatment beyond first aid. Someone goes and has to get stitches for their injury. That would be considered a reportable. If they lose consciousness, if they fracture a tooth, or they have a broken bone, they puncture an eardrum, needle sticks and sharps injuries, occupational hearing loss, exposure to tuberculosis, all of these fall under the reportable category, as well as a work-related diagnosis of cancer or some chronic irreversible disease. However, not every injury is recordable. And again, you don't want to record things that are first aid only. You want to avoid putting those on your 300 log, as they do not need to be recorded. This would be things like using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. You give over-the-counter Tylenol. It doesn't need to be recorded. Someone needs to get a tetanus shot. If we're just cleaning or flushing out a wound, using hot or cold therapy. You use a Band-Aid or a Steri-Strip or a butterfly bandage. Using a back brace or a sling or a splint. If you have to have a fingernail or a toenail drained, drilled to drain or relieve some pressure. None of these need to be recorded. If you're using the person has to wear an eye patch, or they have to have their eye flushed to remove a foreign body in their eye. Again, none of these are reportable. This is first aid only. If you use a finger guard, or the person has to get a massage, even drinking fluids to relieve heat stress. So some of the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Robert.
No, I'm saying it's good, thank you.
Some of the common record-keeping mistakes that we see all the time is, the big one is that people just don't keep the log at all. They're not using the 300 log. They're not really tracking what injuries or illnesses they have in the workplace. Another one is not actually developing or generating the 300A summary and posting it from February 1st to April 30th. Not including a unique case number from the 300 log to the 301 incident reporting form. Not providing enough details, a description of the injury. Marking more than one column for classifying cases, and on the 300 log that would be columns G, H, I, and J. You only check one of those. You don't check more than one. Incorrectly entering the number of work days that were missed. So you actually do not count the first day, the day that the injury occurred is not considered a lost day. It's the second day and days beyond that are what gets recorded. Not having your sums total or even cross over correctly from the log to the summary. The Excel spreadsheet that Robert had mentioned earlier is very nice to use because it is directly tied together. So the data that you put in on the 300 log sheet actually is used to calculate on the 300A summary. So it's already done for you. You just need to put in information regarding the number of employees you have for the year and the number of the hours worked. So that's a nice tool to make things a whole lot easier for that person that has to do this record keeper. Another problem is that a high-ranking executive of the company doesn't review or certify the form. And that's really sort of the checks and balances. You want to make sure that that information is correct. Another one is confusing OSHA recordable injuries with workers' compensation claims. Not every workers' compensation claim is going to be an OSHA recordable. So, for instance, if someone goes to an emergency room because they hurt themselves, they cut their finger, they bumped their head, and they aren't sure that the bump on the head is really a concussion. And they get to the ER and they find out the person is fine. It's not an OSHA recordable, but there might be some workers' comp claims, financial
to recover them.
Yeah, ways to recover the money. It might be submitted at a workers' compensation claim, but not be recorded on the OSHA 300 log. And then again, the big problem is over-recording. This is recording every single bump or bruise that somebody gets. No, we only want to record the things that actually meet OSHA's recordable requirements, those general recording criteria. Back to Robert.
Okay. Now, some of the other provisions that are included in this that we want to talk about are, this really thing about retaliation. And of course, OSHA pretty much right now prohibits this, but under this they put what really amounts to some extra criteria and teeth in it, because they can now cite an employer for retaliation, and it doesn't require the employee to have made a complaint. It's like, okay, we looked at this and you did these things and we consider them to be retaliation. And the employee might not even be involved in that by way of a complaint and stuff, yet the company's on the hot seat because OSHA is saying they have used retaliation or disciplinary policies to avoid reporting. And according to OSHA, this will help prevent employers from discouraging employees from reporting hazardous conditions or things like injuries, which, of course, if you have an injury, is that not traceable back to a quote-unquote hazardous condition? Okay, and just a couple other points to kind of go over with this. An employer can't do anything that looks like they're punishing the employee from having an injury. Okay, and punishment can mean a number of things. You can't give an employee a drug or alcohol test if that's not given to every other employee under similar circumstances. Okay, that's one thing. You can't have an employee have to do something or report to certain people or explain more than somebody else in similar circumstances. So these are the fine points, and they're not all black and white all the time. So everybody out there is going to have to decide, well, what works for us and why. And again, the words that we used from before, whatever it is, consistency is of utmost importance, because that's the biggest way to diffuse any type of an approach to a company that says, you know, you're doing stuff that's retaliating or dissuading or trying to prevent people from doing stuff. So again, any type of retaliation, isolating, demoting an employee. Obviously, you can say, you know, okay, well, that's because you banged up the forklift, and you know, we're going to demote you. And you know, the employee says, well, I got demoted because I reported it. Okay. Again, not that you can't do that, not that maybe you shouldn't do that, but you really should have a policy about that. That if it's proven that this individual can't, in our evaluation, drive the forklift, well, what do we do about that? We have several steps. Okay, could include retraining, could be a first step, and then a reevaluation, because part of retraining is a physical observation. And you know, maybe you have something to suspect that this employee maybe really knows how to drive it, but there's some other issues going on here. Well, then a policy needs to be in place that under those circumstances, how do we properly evaluate the employee? And it doesn't mean that you can't make a policy over time. You can add to a policy, you can create policies, you can stop policies. The whole thing is, at some point, this might be an example where you want to have a policy that we're going to now, when we see this type of thing, take steps, and we're going to do this for all employees in similar situations. Again, it's got to be widespread, and it can't be made to look like you're targeting one employee. Okay, and OSHA also is requiring that employers post the non-retaliation policy poster, which is readily available. No one has to, and all of you or some of you have, I think, already mentioned to us that there's already calls going out from some of these places like the poster companies. They're saying, oh, there's this new poster and you got to have it. For no cost, you could go online, and I think we've provided the links to most everybody. If you don't have it, let us know. We'll gladly send it to you. You can download the poster, print it out on your company printer.
Right, or even ask your account manager. They have them in their car.
Yeah.
So they can, you know, run out to the car and get it for you. It's basically the job safety and health poster.
Great. Okay, now, incentive programs cannot incite underreporting. And OSHA's pointed out some things like prizes structured only around making a low number of worksite injuries violates the new rule, which, you know, we know of several companies that do reward for lowering worksite injuries or avoiding them. The whole thing is that you really have to be careful as to how that's crafted, how that's promoted, etc. You know, we're not saying that you have to stop it while it really looks like it's probably a good idea, unless you can clearly document why you're doing that. An alternative to that might be giving a gift card to an employee who starts a volunteer safety committee. That's acceptable. That's kind of like rewarding for this action and not rewarding for things that might suggest we're underreporting. In general, any incentive should not in any way or form intimidate, discourage employees. Unfortunately, that's a gray area, and many times the bureaucrats look at it one way, and those of us in industry look at it another way. Another area under this that really needs to be given some things is the post-accident drug alcohol test. Under the new rule, it becomes prohibited, and this is really kind of squirrely gray area. If it seems unlikely that the injury resulted from recent drug use. Well, it's kind of like, well, how do I know if it resulted from drug use if I don't test them? Not again that you can't test, but what you should really do is uniformly, you have any type of an accident or an injury or something that occurs, and you can post a list of them. And anybody that has any of these that happen to them, we're going to give them drug and alcohol testing. Okay, that is one way to avoid that. Again, you can't do it for one and not for all. It's got to be uniform, it's got to be for the many, and you got to consistently implement it. And line and safety incentive programs that drug testing is an inappropriate situation could be considered intimidation. Okay, so I'm afraid to report it because, oh my gosh, this is what we're going to have to do. Again, the way around that is a policy procedure and it's uniform. Now, one final reason for looking at a lot of this is the fine and penalty increase that went into effect this past August. Reason for it is that all federal agencies are supposed to keep pace with cost of living adjustments, COLA, every year by federal rule. This is not some new rule that just came out. This has been in place for many, many years. And OSHA, unfortunately, has not issued cost of living increases, so they weren't really abiding by regulations themselves since 1990. So this past August, there was a one-time catch-up. OSHA now has to go every year and provide a cost of living increase. But basically what we're saying is that most everything that's a violation of this new rule, at a minimum, will be other than serious. It could be, if it happens again and again, as bad as repeat and posting requirements, et cetera. So you'll see there, in simple terms, that the new penalty has gone from $7,000 to $12,600. And it's not hard to see why, if something happens and OSHA comes in, and many times they're not just coming in to look at one accident, illness, or one reporting violations. They're often looking at a number of other things in the workplace. So very, very high levels of penalties, and OSHA's really out there citing it. And just as a quick added thing, in the current environment with the new administration, we're not really seeing a whole lot right now that looks like the new administration, while they're really preaching a lot of relief from overzealous regulations, not much has been done with regard to workplace safety. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, Trump and his team met with the heads of a number of the really big unions, and it was a very cordial meeting. Trump in the past, President Trump has affirmed his belief and support for the American worker, and that worker working and having a safe environment to work in. So, from what we're seeing, while some things could be changed, amended, etc., not a real high likelihood that this is going to be among them, even though anything is possible. So I guess what we're saying is, don't bank on that. We know sometimes some companies say, well, I'll wait and see what happens. I mean, it's not that tough. A number of these things, most of you should have been kind of doing anyway. Now the electronic reporting and some of the other provisions are taken it to another level. So I would just say simplest thing is to just, invest the time and effort, and it's not going to be terribly overwhelming to just get in pace with that. So that comprises our part of this. Now or at any time after, we have a few minutes left. If anyone has a question or a statement or something they'd like to do, we'll try to get to it again. If we don't get to them, or if you have them after it, send them to us, and we'll send out a sheet with the questions that were asked.
Okay, so we do have a question.
Okay.
It's, do you record sprains or strains that were looked at by a doctor but didn't require treatment beyond hot or cold therapy or a wrap? And that would be a no. Do not need to record that. That would be considered first aid, even though they were seen by a doctor.
Good. That's a good one. And that also is one that is probably an area where there's a lot of potential misreporting. Good question.
Okay, we have another one. Is the OSHA electronic reporting requirements the same thing as the request by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics for information? And the answer to that is no. It's not the same thing, and there may be instances that you do have to file or complete both the BLS survey and the OSHA electronic reporting. At least that's the way that it is right now.
Okay, good question. One other that I see here that comes in is we, in my company, use company forms. Should I continue to use those or use the OSHA provided forms?
Well, we strongly recommend that you start using the OSHA forms, because for the electronic reporting, those are the forms you have to submit. So get into the habit of using them. You may have a company form that would be your accident investigation form, or your supervisor's summary of the report of the injury or accident or illness. But we strongly recommend that you use the OSHA forms.
Okay, good. All right. So I think that's about, our time is about up. I want to thank you all for coming on board and listening. I especially want to thank Karen, who has really worked so hard to put together a lot of this and answers and interfaces with so many of our customers and clients that have needs and issues. So again, if anybody has information, the email right there, I would suggest you really direct anything to Karen, as she is the coordinator for all this and really the subject matter expert on so much of this. I know I've done a lot of talking, but Karen's really the one that I must say is the most knowledgeable.
And I wanted to share one additional handout that we didn't really address. All of the other ones were mentioned throughout, but this, it's like my cheat sheet. So it's very easy to look at this and figure out what category it falls in and determine whether or not it is medical treatment or non-recordable, just first aid. So this is the guide to OSHA recordability, and it's very helpful.
And everybody got that in their materials?
Everybody should have gotten it emailed to them, yeah.
Okay. That's really good, Karen. Thanks for sharing that one. Okay, and that's it. So we thank you, and if there's any follow-up needed, as I say, you have our emails and contact stuff. Want to thank you again.